Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Dr. Carl James, and I'm the Head of Military History here at the Australian War Memorial. And it is my great pleasure this morning to welcome you for this special launch of For Gallantry, written by Memorial Curator Mr. Craig Blanche. I'd like to begin by acknowledging the traditional custodians on the land on which we meet today, the Ngunnawal people, and to also acknowledge the custodians of the land on which you're meeting today also. Whilst it is unfortunate that we aren't all able to meet here today in person, we would like to welcome those people watching the recording of today's launch through the Memorial's website. I would also like to acknowledge the following guests joining us today in person. His Excellency General the Honourable David Hurley, Governor-General of the Commonwealth of Australia, and Her Excellency Mrs. Linda Hurley. Ms. Sharon Pendergrast, Director of the Australian Honours and Awards Secretariat. Ms. Teresa Hart, Chair of the Australian Bravery Decorations Council. Mr. Graham Althorpe, Secretary of the Cowra Breakout Association. Mr. Richard Rolfe, Vice Patron of the Cross of Valour Association. And now, Wing Commander Sharon Bowen, representing the Chairman of the Council of the Australian War Memorial. I'd now like to invite Mr. Matt Anderson, Director of the Australian War Memorial, to deliver the welcome.
Firstly, I too would like to acknowledge the Ngunnawal people, the traditional custodians of the land on which we gather, and pay my respects to elders past and present. I'd also like to acknowledge those that the MC, Dr. Carl, has just acknowledged, in particular to acknowledge our council as represented by Wing Commander Sharon Bowen to the Memorial. Welcome back, and thank you for your sustained duties here at the Memorial. But on behalf of the staff, I really want to welcome you all to a very, very special day that, as you'll hear, has been many years in the making. 2 years ago at the Memorial, we launched For Valour, Australians who have been awarded the Victoria Cross. And it's appropriate that today, also at the Australian War Memorial, we launch its companion volume, For Gallantry, Australians awarded the George Cross and the Cross of Valour. For we are better as a community and as a nation when we celebrate goodness in the face of evil and we celebrate profound acts of sustained gallantry. For Gallantry was an idea 57 years in the making. Historian Lionel Wigmore, who wrote this book, and by the way, this copy of this book I bought as a 12-year-old, my first visit to the War Memorial. And it says on the inside, Leading Cadet Anderson, Number 1 Flight Victorian Squadron Air Training Corps. So obviously it has sat on my bookshelf ever since. But when he wrote in that book, he acknowledged the Victoria Cross and the George Cross. And he said, it could be difficult at times to decide where the border lies between the two. So They Dared Mightily and subsequent editions did include the George Cross, but increasingly over subsequent volumes, they were always consigned to the back of the book. And when the Cross of Valour came in after 1975, that got even fewer mentions. So an idea was born between Craig Blanche and Dr. Aaron Pegram when they decided that For Valour, the book on the Victoria Crosses, would be the first of 2 volumes. And today, for the first time, we have a standalone volume on the George Cross and the Cross of Valour. And I'm very, very proud of both their decision and their execution. Because it describes bravery in forms far removed from battle, but with common threads of selflessness and courage. The Imperial George Cross and the Australian Cross of Valour are our nation's highest form of former and current awards for bravery outside of combat. The George Cross was instituted by King George VI during the Blitz in London, when he was moved by the courage on display by those in uniform and out of uniform. And at the time he declared that he wanted to establish a separate medal that would sit beside its military counterpart, the Victoria Cross. He would sit beside it. The Cross of Valour was created as the Australian equivalent in 1975 under our own homegrown honours and awards system. But For Gallantry profiles the Australians from all walks of life who have been recognised for actions of outstanding physical and moral courage. Some were born here, Others chose to call Australia home. Some of the actions occurred here, and other, as you'll read, actions occurred in the farthest reaches of the globe. Among them, a tram conductor who sacrificed his life to warn others of the impending danger as his tram hurtled out of control. A naval chief petty officer who remained with his trapped young seamen, giving them comfort even as their ship sank to the ocean's bed. A farmer who used his body to earth a high voltage cable and to save a young child. A geologist and a police constable who braved the terrible aftermath of a terrorist bombing to help the injured and the dying. Prisoners of war who died rather than to betray their ideals. And a dental student who went to the aid of a swimmer amidst a frenzied shark attack. These are all stories that demonstrate that Australians do not need to go to war to display acts of profound bravery. I wish to thank sincerely Richard Rolfe, AM, Vice Patron of the Cross of Valour Association of Australia, and his wife Deborah, both generous supporters of us and our work here at the Australian War Memorial. We thank Richard for your financial support that has enabled this publication to reach fruition. You know, we are richer for having it on our shelves and for having you in our company. His work, I'd also like to acknowledge Craig Blanche, who's with us today, and his family, who brought a wealth of experience to this task. For those who don't know, Craig is amongst the memorial's foremost experts on the Victoria Cross, the George Cross, and the Cross of Valour. He's spoken with many of you, but he's also entered into new insights. He's done deeper digging into some of the lesser-known stories of the individuals behind the awards conveyed in this book. And importantly, he and New South Publishing have produced a work of significant and of great beauty, but of significant intellectual merit. So I commend this book to anyone with an interest in the true meaning of courage. Because, as Nelson Mandela said, courage is not the absence of fear, but the triumph over it. The brave man is not he who does not feel afraid, but he who conquers that fear. I'm honoured to be in your company today. We're richer for telling your stories here at the Australian War Memorial, where we'll continue to be honoured and inspired by all who put service before self. The world needs heroes, I think, probably now more than ever. And for inspiration, we need look no further than inside the cover of this book. Thank you.
Now, having served in the Australian Defence Force for 42 years, and now serving as the Governor-General of the Commonwealth of Australia, His Excellency General, the Honourable David Hurley, has a long-standing connection with those who perform acts of heroism and conspicuous courage in extreme danger. Now in his position as Governor-General, His Excellency reviews award recommendations put forward for these types of actions performed by Australian citizens. As such, it is fitting that I now invite His Excellency General, the Honourable David Hurley, Governor-General of the Commonwealth of Australia, to officially launch for Gallantry.
Well, ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for the very kind invitation for Linda and I to be here today, and particularly for me to be able to launch this very important book. It's about the history of Australia and about the people of Australia. Before I begin as well, I also acknowledge the Ngunnawal people, the traditional owners of this land here around the Canberra region. As I say in many of my welcomes, you just need to look up at the Brindabellas, north, south and around our capital city to see how beautiful that land is, and to thank the Ngunnawal people for caring for it for generation after generation. And I do pay my respects to elders past and present. Could I also join in acknowledging all our VIPs this morning? It's a long list, and as it should be, reflecting both the importance of this book and our history. But I could particularly just this morning acknowledge our George Cross and Cross of Gallantry recipients, family members of George Cross recipients, and other distinguished guests. The Cross of Valour is something that crosses my mind, and the George Cross as well, each time I drive in and out of Government House, because to our left as we leave the house is the Bravery Garden, established by one of my predecessors in the shape of the Southern Cross. And at each point where a star would sit, there's a sandstone pillar with a story about either the George Cross, the Cross of Valour, the Victoria Cross. And each year, family members come to that garden to lay a wreath in memory of those in particular who have either died in receipt of that award or have passed on since. It's a very compelling, a very beautiful place, a very still place, right in the heart of the seat of the highest appointment in our country. And it is exactly as it should be, because that's where we should be acknowledging contributions of this nature to the fabric of our society. One of the stories for Gallantry. At about 8:30 p.m. on the 12th of January 1945, Sergeant Bailey, while on duty in Blaney, had occasion to speak to a man whose movements were suspicious. During the questioning, the man pulled a revolver from his pocket and fired a shot which struck Bailey in the stomach. Bailey immediately closed with his assailant, who fired 2 more shots. Although fast succumbing to his injuries and suffering from the effect of shock and hemorrhage, Bailey continued to struggle with the offender and held him on the ground until assistance arrived. Shortly afterwards he died. The fortitude and courage manifested by this police officer, in spite of the mortal injury sustained by him at the outset of the encounter, constitute bravery and devotion to duty of the highest order. This is one of the stories in this magnificent book. And it's a story that sort of stops you in the tracks, doesn't it? And I'm not singling it out because it involves a member of the police force, a group of men and women who I hold in very high regard, but it affected me because I wanted to believe that Sergeant Bailey died knowing that he had done his community proud, and indeed he was a hero. In the moments before he died, what was he thinking? What was he thinking when he closed with the assailant at this time, before the second and third fatal shots? I made an error when I started. I mentioned the Star of Courage instead of the Cross of Valour. And I wanted to pick up on that now because last week, it's in my mind, because last week we were privileged, Linda and I, to go to Elcho Island in Gallawinko, the small community there, to present a Star of Courage to a 16-year-old Aboriginal girl for fighting off a man armed with a knife who was attacking a friend of hers in school 3 years ago. It was a great community occasion, very emotional, that brought everyone together, a lot of dancing and singing, and a great celebration of her character. On that day, I said to her what I would have liked to have said to Sergeant Bailey. And these are the words I say to every recipient of a Bravery Award as they come forward and I present them with their medal. Thank you for putting the safety of others above your own. It's as simple as that. Thank you for putting the safety of others above your own. Now, we're often told, and as indeed the comment from Nelson Mandela reflects, that these decisions are made in fear, but they're made quickly. There's no real time to think. And in that, it tells a lot of us. At investitures, I'm often surprised how nervous the recipient is standing in the door. People who receive ACs, OAMs, AMs, they stand there, they're ready to come in. Recipients of bravery medals are shaking. They are obviously more terrified at that moment than they were at the moment of the act for which they're being recognised. Why? Because most of them think they're unworthy. I am doing no more than anyone else would do. But that's not the case. You did something. You responded. You protected. I'm privileged to be a good friend of Al Sparks sitting at the back here. I told Al after I presented him with his second bravery medal, I'm not going to give you a third. Stop doing it. But Alan represents, I think, the character of the people who are included, whose stories are in this book. Still giving to community, a big heart for community. And it plays out in this way. So for Gallantry, not only tells us the story of the individuals, but gives us an insight to the human condition, gives us an insight to Australians. Meticulously researched, Craig's book describes the courageous actions of 28 outstanding and selfless Australians. It recounts the recipients of the country's premier, former and current non-combat awards, the George Cross and the Cross of Valour. And this is the first time all the recipients of these awards have been brought together in a dedicated volume. And along, of course, with the military equivalent, the Victoria Cross, the George Cross and the Cross of Valour recognise compelling actions and stories of courage. For Gallantry features the stories of all Australian recipients of these awards spanning almost 90 years, from the incredible endurance of a Victorian teacher, Richard Richards, in the frozen wastes of Antarctica, to the extraordinary bravery of a policeman, Senior Constable Timothy Britton, and a geologist, Richard Joyce, amid the carnage of the Bali bombings. It is a compelling read, and I must admit to finding it a book hard to put down, even in electronic form. Craig and Richard will speak shortly about their motivations for respectively writing and sponsoring the book. As Governor-General, I was delighted to be asked to launch for Gallantry, because my appointment continually invites me to learn more about Australians and to see more of how ordinary people can perform such extraordinary acts of bravery. And these acts of bravery cannot be easily categorised. Anyone, at any moment, might find themselves in a situation when they are called to act. That individual's response is instinctive rather than premeditated, motivated, I believe, only by an instinctive need to help and protect others. Our recipients are selfless, they deserve our praise and recognition, and are an inspiration to all of us. And indeed, to add to what Matt has said, an inspiration is what we need at the moment. So this book is very timely. I congratulate Craig for his persistence in pursuing the research, writing and publication of the book. As he states in his preface, this book owes its creation to many people, and we thank them as well. I thank New South Publishing for producing such a fine book and for assuring that today's launch has occurred. And on that note, in reflection and memory of all this represents for Australia, I'm proud to launch for Gallantry, Australians awarded the George Cross and the Cross of Valour. Thank you.
Now, Mr. Craig Blanche is a curator at the Australian War Memorial, and as Matt mentioned, he is one of our organisation's, or probably our organisation's, leading expert on the Victoria Cross, the George Cross, and the Cross of Valour. He co-authored in 2018 the publication For Valour, Australians awarded the Victoria Cross, and is a contributing author to the edited work on the Changi book. In For Gallantry, Craig has written a unique publication focusing on both military and civilian recipients of the George Cross and its post-1975 Australian Honours and Awards replacement, the Cross of Valour, the highest decoration for bravery in the Commonwealth next to the Victoria Cross. I now invite Mr. Craig Blanche to speak about For Gallantry.
This is the second time that I've been privileged to stand here, having written of remarkable Australians. The first being as co-author with Dr. Aaron Pegram of For Valour, Australians awarded the Victoria Cross in 2018. On this occasion, however, I have been able to write of courage in many of its forms, across a broad range of our community, both civilian and military. It was a very different experience. In 1915, a 21-year-old Ballarat school teacher by the name of Richards was marooned with a small party in Antarctica. All links to the outside world gone. Almost 2 years would elapse before they are rescued. Their situation was dire, but lives depended on them creating a series of depots over hundreds of miles of frozen sea, provisioned with little more than the detritus of previous expeditions. After months on the ice in the most brutal conditions, they completed their task. 3 of their party were lost. When they were finally rescued, they learned that there were never any lives to be saved, that the depots were needless. Richard said later that the effort was unnecessary, that the sacrifice was made to no purpose in the end was irrelevant. To me, no undertaking carried through to conclusion is for nothing, and so I don't think of our struggle as futile. It is something that the human spirit accomplished. That simple quote takes pride of place at the very front of the book. Richard Richards' actions in Antarctica are the earliest recognised, with the George Cross to an Australian. The purpose of this book is simple: awareness of our nation's highest non-combat awards for exceptional courage. How many recognise the names Richard Richards, Jack Chalmers, William McAloney, Darrell Tree, George Taylor, Horace Madden, Victor Bosco, Raymond Donoghue, Eric Bailey, and I could go on. Their deeds made headlines before, generally speaking, they disappeared from public consciousness. Recipients of the Victoria Cross are quite rightly brought to the fore on the anniversary of their remarkable deeds, or as postscripts to the anniversaries of great battles. For this reason, For Gallantry is a standalone companion volume to For Valour, and not just appendices to the George Cross and the Cross of Valour's senior military counterpart. It is time that they too stood as broadly recognised symbols of our best selves. Within the pages are stories of moral and physical courage that invite the reader to ask, what would I have done? Some of the actions lasted minutes, some lasted months. Some were single acts of bravery, others went back to the well of courage time and again. Some took place in war, others in peacetime. Not all survived, not all were left unchanged. Only one name appears on the front cover of the book, and I find that rather awkward given the amount of people that played their part in its production. Thanks to the Memorial's director, Matthew Anderson, for his support and for writing the preface of the book, and assistant directors Brian Dawson and Leanne Patterson for supporting the concept. A special thanks to assistant director Anne Benny for her interest and welcome advice throughout. Thanks particularly to Richard Rolfe for contributing the foreword, and whose generosity and enthusiasm for the project made it possible. To Daniel Kieran VC for his generous endorsement on the rear cover. It is also a great honour to be able to thank the Governor-General, who we are privileged to have here today to mark For Gallantry's launch. I was lucky enough to have former Royal Australian Navy clearance diver Hector Donoghue as an advisor for our Royal Australian Navy George Cross recipients. Historians Anthony Staunton, one of my authoritative forebears and writer on this very subject. Paul Street and John Perryman were also generous with their time and expertise. I would like to thank my colleagues here at the Memorial for giving me their support over the last 12 months, and without whom this book would not have been possible. The understanding staff of my own section of military heraldry and technology deserve high praise for their tolerance and assistance while I have been sequestered away, led by Nick Fletcher, who was often my long-suffering but patient sounding board. Gratitude goes to my project team, Ron Schroer, the program manager, Kelda McManus, the project manager, curators Cameron Ross, Keith Dettridge, Craig Burrell and Michael Grant, historian Aaron Pegram, image interpreter Kate Burge and digital preservation manager Bob McHenry for their expertise in areas where I was not. Memorial editor Duncan Baird was an absolute joy to work with, and I am happy to say a master at his craft. Thank you to the Memorial's team of incredible historians, to members of the Research Centre, Photo, Film and Sound, and Collection Services, who also deserve their place here, and to the Communications and Marketing and Commemoration and Visitor Engagement teams for making today's event possible in very uncertain times, particularly Nathan Boyd, Megan Scott and Marisa Ayler. Thank you to the publishers, New South Books, particularly Elspeth Menzies and Paul O'Ban, for their patience and professionalism in the creation of this stunning publication. It is no small thrill to see an idea given life in such a way. Very few can discount the contribution of family in any undertaking, and this was no exception. My loving and unfailingly supportive wife Lizzie, who believes in possibilities, even in me. The pride shown by all my family are moments to be hoarded with the best of my memories. Finally, I would like to thank the surviving holders of these prestigious awards for their patience and assistance in telling their stories when it was not always easy to do so. Michael Pratt, GC, Darryl Tree, CV, Victor Bosco, CV, Alan Sparks, CV, OAM, Tim Britton, CV, and Richard Joyce, CV. I would also like to give a special thanks to David Matthews, the son of Lionel Matthews, GC, MC, for proofreading the story of his incredible father. Appreciation must also be given to Detective Superintendent Gavin Dengate, SC, a critical actor in the Alan Sparks story. To those I have missed, I can only apologise and say a heartfelt thank you for your kindness and support. It has been a wonderful journey. Thank you.
Well done, and thank you, Craig. It is a significant achievement, and I think we all look forward to your third book. Sorry, Nick. Now, Mr. Richard Rolfe has been an active supporter of the Australian War Memorial and a major contributor to bringing this publication to fruition, ensuring that these incredible stories of bravery are told and they're shared. In addition to writing the book's foreword, Mr. Rolfe is also the Vice Patron of the Cross of Valour Association. I now invite Mr. Richard Rolfe to say a few words.
It's an honour to be here this morning, and I'm thrilled to have played a small role in the formation and publication of this fantastic book. I can only recommend strongly that you read each of the stories and try to figure out what you may or may not have done if you were in the circumstances that those people found themselves in. To Victor Bosco and Alan Sparks, who are here this morning, and to the other living Cross of Valour recipients and George Cross recipient, Michael Pratt, that I know very well. They are outstanding Australians, and I think that their stories need to be told. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Rolfe. I know what I would do, and I probably wouldn't be gallant in most of those situations. Ladies and gentlemen, that concludes the official launch of For Gallantry, Australians awarded the George Cross and the Cross of Valour. Now, on behalf of the Chairman, the Director and the staff here at the Australian War Memorial, thank you all for joining us this morning for the launch of For Gallantry, Australia's awarded the George Cross and the Cross of Valour. This publication is also available online through the Memorial's bookshop. Thank you for your attendance this morning, and please enjoy the rest of your day.